Welcome back to another episode of On the Record. New location unlocked. I'm at my parents' house in Florida this week. Thank you guys for joining me on this new episode. We've officially broken 100 subscribers on YouTube. Thank you guys so much. Keep it coming. Let's get right into the episode. Okay, before I get into the main segment, I just want to mention a few things. First of all, congratulations to the U.S. men's hockey team getting that gold medal last week. First time since the 1980 Miracle on Ice that the U.S. men's were able to secure gold, ending a 46-year drought. It was a really exciting and nerve-wracking game. Peak hockey right there. That's what it's all about. And let's not forget the women's hockey team. They also secured gold. In fact, American women seem to really carry Team USA this Winter Olympics, winning most of our gold medals. So shout out to both of them, capping off the Olympics in golden fashion. On Thursday, in the Sixers game against the Miami Heat, Tyrese Maxey broke Allen Iverson's record for most three-pointers made in franchise history. He has now scored 887 three-pointers in his career, and what's most remarkable is he did it in 375 games compared to the 722 games it took Iverson to set the previous record. Unreal stuff. He's nowhere near finished playing, so you gotta think this is gonna become a record that won't be broken for a very long time. Shout out to Tyrese Maxey, playing out of his mind this year. Super exciting to watch. All-star starter. You know, when he gets hot, he completely takes over games to the point where it's comical sometimes with the shots he makes. He cemented himself as a certified superstar. The Sixers will go as far as Maxey takes them this year. Last thing I want to mention is a quick follow-up to my last video where I talked about the Ryan Garcia fight. If you watched my last video, I did pick Garcia to lose, but I had also laid out some keys to victory for him, which he followed to a T in his win last week over Mario Barrios. I talked about how he couldn't get stuck trying to land his one best shot, that left hook, and that he had to mix it up and use the threat of that hook to set up other shots, and that's exactly what he did. He beat up Mario Barrios all night with his right hand. He went to the body. He controlled the pace of the fight. Great win for Ryan. I'm happy to see him get back on track. Should be some exciting fights in store for him. Okay, we are a week and a half away from NFL free agency, so I want to talk about the Eagles' upcoming free agents and what I think the organization should do with each player. Now, the Eagles have a total of 19 players set to hit the market this season and become unrestricted free agents. I will bring up all 19 of these players, but we'll certainly be spending more time on some than others. Before I get into the stay or go, I want to preface by talking about something Howie Roseman discussed with the media a few weeks ago. He talked about the Eagles' roster structure and how it has allowed them to be so successful over the past few seasons. Over the past couple of years, the Eagles have had great success drafting young defensive players. Guys like Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Quinyon Mitchell, Nolan Smith, Cooper DeJean. You have all these great players on the defensive side of the ball on cheap rookie contracts. This has allowed the Eagles to invest most of their money into the offensive side of the ball and have elite groups on both sides. Now, Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown have huge contracts. Devontae Smith has a big contract. The offensive line is paid. And now we're approaching a time where this is going to have to kind of flip around. And we're going to have to start paying the defense. Jalen Carter is going to become the highest paid D tackle in the league when he gets paid. Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, they're both going to be one of the highest paid players at their positions. The Eagles are going to have to look to get younger on the offensive side of the ball soon. And I expect this year's draft to be a bit more offense heavy than the last few years. Okay, let's get into the free agents, starting with the defensive side of the ball. Right off the bat, Azeez Ojulari, Josh Uche, Agba Akaranwaku, these are all edge rushers, and we should let all of them walk. All three of these guys were very underwhelming this season, poor production, some had injury issues, and none of them showed anything that merits a contract extension. That leaves two free agent edge rushers that the Eagles will actually have to make a decision with, and that's Jalen Phillips and Brandon Graham. Now, we know the story with Graham. He's a Philly legend. He's old. He retired after the Super Bowl in 24, came back to play again during this season. He had pretty average production, wasn't bad, wasn't great, has a few sacks. But he's also a big locker room guy, kind of operates as a player coach like Kyle Lowry does for the Sixers. If he wants to take another minimum deal that won't have much impact on the salary cap and come back for a real retirement tour, I'm okay with it. Now the real question at the edge rusher position is Jalen Phillips. Now, I like Jalen Phillips. I think he played well this season after he got traded to the Eagles, and I think it would be nice to have him back on the team. The Eagles are really thin at the edge rusher position. And if Phillips doesn't end up coming back, they're certainly going to have to look to bring some more guys in. So I would like him back, but I'm not as high on him as I've seen other people be. A lot of Eagles fans view him as the top priority and an absolute must sign, which is understandable because, like I said, the Eagles are really thin at the edge position. But I'm not there. I think Phillips is going to be looking for a pretty hefty contract. He's a guy that's had some serious injury issues in the past, and I'm sure he's going to want to secure a bag while he's healthy and playing well. And I don't know if it's worth it for the Eagles. He's a good edge rusher, but he's not a game wrecker. He's no Parsons or Crosby or Garrett by any means. And there'll always be that lingering injury concern for the rest of his career. I think the Eagles would be able to find someone in free agency who can give them similar production for less money, or they could look into the draft. I think they definitely will draft an edge rusher this year. But, who knows? We also talked about approaching the point where we're going to be putting a lot of money into the defense. Maybe Howie wants to make a bigger swing for a real X factor. They've been linked to guys like Max Crosby in a potential trade. But I don't want to go too far down that path right now. If Phillips wants to take a pay cut to stay, I'll be okay with it. But I don't see him being okay with it, with his injury history. And I don't blame him. My verdict for Jalen Phillips is go. But I won't be surprised if, Vic Fangio wants him back. They did trade draft capital for him. Maybe the market for him won't end up being that robust, and the Eagles could pull off a 1 or 2 year deal. We'll have to see. If that's the case, I'll definitely be okay with it. Okay, now let's turn to the secondary. We have Adoree Jackson, Marcus Epps, and Reed Blankenship set to become free agents. Adoree Jackson is an absolute must-go for me. He was by far the weakest link of the entire Eagles defense this season, not just the secondary. He played poorly. The fan base is unhappy with him. I don't see any scenario where Adoree Jackson is back in Philly. Marcus Epps. So Epps started the season on the practice squad, and the Eagles elevated him to play safety after the injury to our standout rookie safety, Drew Makuba. He played decently well after being elevated. I don't think he's done anything to warrant a new contract. But if the Eagles can bring him back on the practice squad again and have him for emergency situations like this season, I'm okay with it. In fact, I would like it a lot because, I do think he's a solid backup safety. And now we turn to Reed Blankenship, one half of the coveted Eagles' exciting whites duo. And I think he should stay. I think the Eagles should look to re-sign Reed. I view Reed as an above-average safety. He's not a superstar, but he is a solid starting caliber NFL safety. And he's also a great chemistry guy. His teammates love him. The fans love him. And I don't think he's going to carry an outrageous price tag. I think he'll be pretty affordable. If the Eagles let him go, they're just going to be praying they find someone as good as him who meshes as good as him with the team. And I think that's just an unnecessary search to embark on. Unless Howie's looking to make a big swing at the safety position, which I don't think is that likely. I say bring him back. Pair him up with Drew Makuba, who looked really good before his injury. Bring in someone for depth, whether it's free agency or the draft or Epps on the practice squad, and, you'll have a solid safety core. Now, the last and perhaps biggest free agency question on the defensive side of the ball is linebacker Nakobe Dean. As much as it pains me to say it, I think he's got to go. And, it's not because of bad play or anything. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Nakobe just had the best season of his career. He was an absolute cornerstone of the defense this year and last year. And I think he actually played his way out of the Eagles' price range. After the season he just had, he deserves to go get a big extension. And there's no way the Eagles can justify giving it to him after they just drafted Jahad Campbell in the first round last year. And, Campbell was playing well at the beginning of the season. He filled in for Dean, who was still recovering from a knee injury at the beginning of the season. Campbell lost a lot of his reps when Dean came back. But a first-round pick is a big investment. You have to trust Jahad and let him develop and let him take over Dean's position. You also have Jeremiah Trotter Jr. still developing. You have Smael Mondon, who they drafted in the later rounds last year. He impressed a lot in camp and preseason. No way you can justify giving Dean a big contract when you have these young guys coming up. My verdict has to be go. I wish him the best. He's a great player. He's going to be a top free agent, and I'm sure he's going to get paid, just not here. Okay, let's move to the offensive side of the ball. Let's start with the offensive line. The Eagles have 3 offensive line this year who are going to hit free agency. Matt Pryor, Brett Toth, and Fred Johnson. I think the Eagles can comfortably move off of Matt Pryor and Brett Toth. Both served as backups and didn't really contribute much this season. Pryor did get some play time early on in the season and sporadically throughout the season. But he was honestly a liability when he did play. A good example is in that Rams game in week 3 when he stepped in for an injured Lane Johnson and lost almost every rep. It was so bad that they ended up subbing in Fred Johnson later on, who was much better, not only in that game, but throughout the season. Johnson became that go-to guy to fill in for Lane. And, he was also that guy last season when we won the Super Bowl. He's been a really solid swing tackle for the Eagles the last 2 years. And I'd be happy to have him back on another short-term deal to continue in that role. However, I do possibly see him getting some offers from other teams, perhaps even a starting spot, on one of the weaker O-line groups in the league right now. I guess we'll have to see. But if it's up to me, I say stay for Fred Johnson. Running back A.J. Dillon is going to be a free agent. Definitely a go for me. No reason for the Eagles to consider signing him. He barely played this season. He was a healthy scratch for multiple games. They traded for Tank Bigsby, who played well when he got touches. They also have Will Shipley, who's been solid. Definitely no room for us to extend A.J. Dillon. Wide receiver Jahan Dotson is also set to hit free agency. And he's also a go for me. He never lived up to that potential we hope he had when we traded for him in 2024. He was definitely a solid third wide receiver, but he's easily replaceable. I think the Eagles can find someone who can contribute more in free agency or maybe even the draft. He hasn't shown nearly enough for us to consider giving him a contract extension. He did have a great catch in the Super Bowl that set the tone early on. I'll never forget it. I wish him the best. Almost the entire Eagles tight end room is set to hit free agency. That includes Grant Calcaterra, Kyle Granson, and Dallas Goedert, who's coming off the best year of his career, where he had 11 touchdowns. Grant Calcaterra, definitely a go for me. He's been here a couple of years now. Never contributed much offensively. He's a poor blocker. And, as a tight end, you can't be bad at both of those things. You have to, at the very least, be able to do one of those things well. The best tight ends in the game are good at both. Kyle Granson, he can stay. He didn't play much offensively, but he was a big contributor on special teams. He had the second most tackles on special teams this season for us. He's going to be really cheap, not going to cost much. If the Eagles want to bring him back as depth and to continue being a special teams contributor, I'm good with that. That leaves us with Dallas Goedert. He had a hell of a season, led the team in touchdowns. This is another guy that I think might have played his way out of the Eagles' price range. For a team that's going to have to hand out a lot of big contracts soon, I don't know if the tight end position will be one of them. I think this is one of the positions where I can see Howie cutting costs and looking to get younger. The Eagles have been heavily linked to guys like Isaiah Likely and Kenyon Sadiq out of Oregon in this upcoming draft. I can see them opting to go in one of those directions instead. Again, this has nothing to do with Goddard's play. He absolutely deserves to get paid. But this is a business. The Eagles have to get ready to hand out multiple massive contracts on the defense soon, and we need to create space. I think Goedert will end up being a financial casualty. Last but not least, we have punter Braden Mann set to become a free agent. Definitely want him back, man. He was really good this season. One of the best punters in the league. Not going to cost much. Absolutely no reason, in my opinion, for the Eagles not to try and bring him back. I'm excited to see how Howie approaches free agency and the draft. Who stays, who goes. I trust Howie. He's proven over and over he knows what he's doing. Free agency starts soon. Let's sit back and see what happens. Okay, that's all we have for today. Thank you guys for joining me for this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed. I will be in Las Vegas next week, so I won't be posting a new episode, but I am going to UFC 326 in Vegas, so I'll be posting a vlog documenting that experience. Stay tuned for that. As always, like, comment, subscribe, check us out on our other platforms. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you next time.